Hello, welcome everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful MassURC day. I was just noting a couple of seconds ago how wonderful it's been to be part of the panels. The students are amazing and wonderful, and the presentations incredibly impressive. So I hope everyone's able to join the rest of the day as well as some of the panels. So welcome everyone. Good morning. I am Dr. Mari Castañeda, Dean of Commonwealth Honors College, also a professor in the Department of Communication. And I am very excited that you are joining us here today for the 2023 keynote address of the Massachusetts Undergraduate Research Conference, as we all call it, MassURC. I'm thrilled that Dr. Christina Royal has been selected as a speaker for this year's annual conference, and it is my honor to introduce her. Dr. Royal has been the president of Holyoke Community College since 2017. Since then, the college has embarked on bold plans, new initiatives, and innovative policies to continue their legacy of affordable and quality education. In fact, during her time as president, HCC was named as one of the top women-led businesses in Massachusetts in 2021 and in 2022 by the Boston Globe magazine and the Women's Edge, which is a nonprofit that supports top female business leaders in the area. Dr. Royal is also the first queer biracial woman of color to hold the position of president HCC. And in these times, that is absolutely groundbreaking and so important. Dr. Royal's keynote this morning is titled Hacking Ourselves, Learning, Unlearning, and Relearning. Her deep understanding of student success is inspiring, and I think her keynote will challenge students and really educators to think differently about their approach to life, particularly one's educational journey. I am excited for this time that we have together, and I hope that you are too. Bienvenida, Dr. Royal. Christina, I turn the floor over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mari, and good to see everyone. Let me start by launching my presentation. So good morning, everyone. I am so very thrilled to be joining you today for the Massachusetts Undergraduate Research Conference. I'm so grateful that we have a conference like this in the state that really helps promote the focus on not only research, but critical thinking and critical inquiry, which to me are really at the heart of the topic of what I'm going to talk about today as we talk a little bit about unlearning as well. So to get started, I want to introduce just a little bit of what I want to cover today with everyone. And this right here is going to be focused on, let's introduce the topic of unlearning and talk about some definitions of unlearning, because there are some different perspectives on the topic, and it might also be a topic that you are less familiar with as I think about ways that people have internalized this conversation. Let's talk about why and how unlearning is present in our everyday lives. And also, what is the relevancy of unlearning to your educational journey and life in general? What research relates to unlearning, and then also an opportunity to focus on some reflection, which I think is very important. So let's get started here. Let me just activate this. Just gonna change the, there we go. All right. So I love this topic. And this quote in particular to me sums up why this becomes really relevant in our day and age. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those that cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And this to me is so important because we do hear a lot about how focusing on reading and writing, which of course is very, very important to our world and society at large. But there's also these emerging skills and adaptable skills that are going to become very, very important as we continue to move forward and grow and learn. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about this. This is an important piece of how learning occurs, but we tend to focus on so much on learning rather than unlearning. And I love this quote: the problem is never how we get new innovative thoughts into your mind, but how do we get the old ones out? And that really starts to get at the heart of why unlearning is so important. When I was first stepping into management and had an opportunity to supervise people years ago, I noticed that there was some challenges with people, quote unquote, learning new ways of doing business and adjusting their work practices. And I started to realize that it wasn't that they couldn't learn. We all can learn, but it was that the current information that they had was interfering with their ability to process some new things. And so we then had to focus on how could we get some of that information out of their heads so that we could then put new information in their heads. So here's one definition of unlearning, and this is that the individual consciously erases obsolete knowledge in favor of knowledge that is more serviceable, a process that is considered to be different from forgetting, where the individual unconsciously loses useful or useless knowledge. And I like that because I love the consciousness around this, that it's being a very intentional process of erasing things that are obsolete. And when we'll talk a little bit later, some of you had sent in some responses to ways that you've unlearned. And I noticed that there was a consciousness in some of those processes. And so that's the piece that I really love about this particular quote. But here's also another one is, thinking about how do we discard something that's learned. Could be a bad habit. It could be false or outdated information from one's memory. How do we get rid of that? And also, the process of unlearning is about liberation or freedom from conditioning or from the known, which I love because we're not going to get into societal and social conditioning today. But when you think about all of the conditioning that occurs from us from birth on, then you have an opportunity to think about how do we liberate ourselves from that by thinking about how we can unlearn what we have been taught and conditioned to do. And so that topic of unlearning gets at this concept of how do we unravel concepts and the conditioning that limits our ability to be open, to be receptive to new ideas. And for folks that maybe are thinking on the more creative realm, I love this idea of addition by subtraction. And so here's a wonderful quote that I love. A great piece of art is composed not just of what is the final piece, but equally important, what is not. It's the discipline to discard what does not fit, to cut out what might have already cost days or even years of effort that distinguishes the truly exceptional artist and marks the ideal piece of work, be it a symphony, a novel, a painting, a company, or most of all, life. And I love this concept by Jim Collins because it is like stripping away old paint and laying new foundation. When you think about painting, I don't know if any of you have actually taken on a painting project, painted your bedroom or another room in the house. But the actual process of painting is stripping away most of the work. And then the actual act of painting is a very small percentage of the job. It's actually about undoing most of it to be able to then lay something new. And then, there's so many concepts within management theory that talk about, and here's another management guru, that it's easy for companies to come up with new ideas. The harder piece is letting go of old ones. And I love that because I find that even in the context of leading an institution, it's really easy to come up with new ideas, but it's harder for us to let go of ones that have been ingrained in us for years or sometimes decades. Here's another definition that I wanted to put forth to you. The new knowledge sits besides the old knowledge, and that the old knowledge can be dredged up if the individual returns to the old context. The reason why I wanted to share this as a contrasting definition is because one is about completely taking away, eliminating that. And another, in this case, Klein is proposing that this concept is not about eliminating the other information, but it's about it sitting beside that information. And so if the conditions are right, then you could return to the old information instead of the new information, depending on the circumstances. And so that plays an important role when you start to get into the nuances of the idea of unlearning versus extinction of knowledge. But for the purposes of today, we are just talking about the idea of unraveling or undoing the kind of knowing that we have about various topics. So I want to talk a little bit about how this is present in our everyday lives, because I feel like the practical side of understanding how is this playing out is really also important for you to understand it academically. So for the adult learners in the room, then you may remember that there was a time when we used to pump our brakes. And that's how we would stop, especially if we were skidding on ice, that we were taught to pump our brakes. And then we had this disruption come, and it was known as anti-lock braking system. And so it started to get more introduced to cars in the 1980s, but became a legal requirement in 2004. And this was an example of something that came into our world, and we had to unlearn a way of doing something. So instead of pumping your brakes when you are skidding on ice, with the anti-lock braking system, you suddenly had to press on the brake and hold it. And then the technology would help you regain control of the car and allow you to steer to be able to avoid an accident. So this is an example of something that we were taught and learned, and then we were expected to unlearn it because it was no longer relevant. And yet, I still know people who will pump their brakes because that's the habit that they have learned. But this technology has forced us to look at it differently. Here's another one, more contemporary, driver's education. We have been taught that we're supposed to put our hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Those are the placements. When you think of a clock, and this picture depicts this, that we're supposed to put our hands on 10 and 2. And that's the most appropriate way for us to be in a good, safe driving position. But now the driver's ed teaches the concept of focusing on a 9-3 mostly. And you can see these two different hand positions that are also both acceptable. So all of a sudden, we went from learning to place our hands one place, and now they're expected to do it someplace differently. Now, this might seem like not such a big deal, but the reality is these are habits. These are habits that we learn, and then they become ingrained in us, and they're difficult sometimes to unlearn. And but the reality is this change was made for the purposes of safety. The reason why we're not supposed to put our hands at 10 and 2 anymore is because of the technology of airbags. And so the idea of having your hands at 9 and 3 position or lower on the steering wheel is so that if the airbags need to deploy in an accident, then your hands and fingers aren't going to be in the way when the airbags are coming out at a very high speed. And so it reduces the risk of injury. And so that is another example in our everyday lives of something that we're having to unlearn. Now, here's another one I want you to think about for a second. So what's 1 + 1? It's a webinar, so I can't interact with you in the same way, but I'm guessing most of you would say 2. That is a very likely answer. And you are actually correct if we are talking about a base 10 number system. And so 1 + 1 is 2. That's what we've been taught in school. But 1 + 1, if we're using a base 2 number system, equals 10. So does 1 + 1 always equal 2? Can you think of another situation when 1 + 1 equals 1? One example of it could be you have one pile of books and you add it to another pile of books, and now you have one pile of books. You have one container of water and you add another container of water, and you still have one container of water. You could take a lot of examples like that. In a couple of presentations that I've done on this topic of unlearning, I've had some really creative audience participation. And one of the ones I really like is someone said that you have 2 people coming together in marriage or a union. And they're like, you have one individual and you have another individual, and now you're coming together in one union, which I thought was a really beautiful expression of this question about what is 1 + 1 and can it equal something other than 2 on a regular basis. And so I raised that because over and over and over, research teaches us to question things, to not just be on autopilot as we make assumptions about the knowledge that we have or what we're told or what we're taught, but instead to really keep our minds expanded to the different possibilities of what could exist. So when you think about what's the relevancy of unlearning in your educational journey or life, not just your academic focus, but in life in general. So when we look at school, you focus on one's ability to take in new information. That's why you're here. You're here to learn. But that's impacted by one's willingness or refusal to let go of outdated or inaccurate information. And so if you're going into situations where you feel like you already know, then that limits your ability to learn. And it also limits your ability to be open to things that have changed. Maybe it was true at one point and now it's not true because there's new research, there's new developments. And so therefore, the context of knowledge in the world we're living in a very dynamic environment, continues to change. So a couple of examples that you submitted in advance when I asked the question about how have you unlearned things, I thought you had some really wonderful examples, and I just wanted to share a couple. So someone had mentioned about conflict management and learning the idea of different lived experiences can create different types of interactions. And so the idea of conflict management became important. And that was something that one student needed to unlearn. Another was hyper independency, which I loved because the person talked about coming into college and feeling like you had to do everything on your own, and all of a sudden had to unlearn that idea that learning, just happens individually, but rather that there is a collaborative component and a group component to learning. Another talked about being able to unlearn a perfectionist mindset. And I loved that because they talked about this letting go of, the experience that they had in high school, and now they're in more academically rigorous work. And so they're having to unlearn this idea that everything that they do has to be perfected. And another person talked about what employers want, how they thought that GPA was going to be the one thing that they asked about, and they realized no one's asking about their GPA, that they're asking about extracurricular activities and where have they played a leadership role in school, and how well-rounded are they. And then another person had talked about needing to unlearn the way that they had studied with physical textbooks, and that they were doing more digital learning now, and that there was a big change there. And it also impacted the way that they took in information and that they studied it. And so these are wonderful examples that you all shared about ways that you are unlearning things that you came in thinking one way about, and then realized that that wasn't serving you, and you expanded your possibilities to grow. Another I wanted to share in terms of a work context is adaptability in the workplace is really critical to someone being successful, especially when changes occur. And that adaptability is something that I hear more and more employers talk about: resiliency in the workplace, their adaptability, the willingness to be able to change as organizations are changing. And so that's another area where the idea of unlearning is going to become really important. When I was in college, my first degree is in mathematics, and when I took some computer science classes as well, and the programming languages that I studied in college were different from the ones that were present when I graduated college. That's how fast the IT world is changing. And so therefore, I had to unlearn things that I had learned in a particular way to be able to help me be successful in the workplace. And then also social media usage. I think this is a big one. And here is a study from the Pew Research Center talking about how adults under 30 are almost as likely to trust information on social media sites as information from national news outlets. And so when you think about the fact that you are doing research in college and you are attending a research conference today, that you think about all the ways that we need to be able to question information in our society. And the reason why this becomes even more challenging is because people are exposed to between 4,000 and 10,000 messages, different types of information a day. And so being able to learn how to rigorously evaluate the information to know what to trust and what not to trust is important. But this, to me, reflects an element that people are overwhelmed with how much information is coming, and also the impact of social media as just a new technology and a delivery mechanism for information, because we know that there is just as much information that is not accurate on social media. So this is interesting as we watch the trends on this study. So perception is a close cousin to the concept of unlearning. And some of you who have maybe taken psychology, then you might be familiar with a couple of these examples. Perception is the process when the brain is organizing and interpreting sensory information. And illusions are misleading or distorted perceptions. So I'll ask, what do you see when you look at your screen right here? Some of you might see two faces. Others might see a vase. What do you see on this screen? Some might see a young woman. Others might see an older woman. On this slide, you see one person sees 4 pieces of wood, another sees 3. And finally, you can see here, one person sees a 6 and another sees a 9. In each of these cases, both perspectives are correct. But if you are fixed in your belief that you are correct, you fail to see the other possibilities and miss the opportunity to grow through understanding the world through a different lens. And it's through that opening of seeing multiple realities, multiple possibilities that spawn new creative thoughts. It spawns new innovation. It spawns new disruptions to our world. And that's the contribution that research really helps benefit our society. So I want to talk a little bit about mindset. I wasn't necessarily the kind of student or child that you would look and say, she is going to be a president someday. I was raised by parents who are low income. And when I was about 8, we were evicted from our apartment. My parents separated, and my mother took us to live with our grandmother. As a child, I had fantasies of being the first woman to play Major League Baseball. But in reality, I just wanted a better life than my parents. Now, what did that mean for me? That meant being able to have reliable transportation. It meant being able to afford the rent. And it also meant being able to go to college because my parents could not. But if you ask me what contributed to me becoming a better student in high school, going and graduating from college and working my way up to become president of a college, I would tell you one thing, and that is mindset. That, I feel like, is my superpower. You see, Dr. Carol Dweck, who is a psychologist and a Stanford professor, among her work, she studied the field of mindset. She wanted to research and study thousands of students to understand how they internalized failure. And so what she realized is that there were essentially 2 different perspectives that people had. they had a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And so she did research with younger children, and she looked and she saw how they responded to problems. So they were given problems that they had to solve, and some were easy, some were difficult. And she noticed the reaction of how people responded to very difficult problems. And so she realized that people ultimately had these two perspectives, one of two perspectives, a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. Fixed concept is a little bit like your eye color. You're born with brown eyes, you're going to have brown eyes your whole life, absent colored contact lenses. And a growth mindset is a little bit like your muscles. You can make them bigger or smaller, but you have the ability to impact a change in that regard. So these two perspectives became very, very important. And what she found is that students who were praised for effort, 90% chose more challenging tasks and showed higher levels of engagement and achievement as compared to students who were praised for intelligence, who ended up selecting easier tasks when given the choice, and also lied about their scores in an effort to look smart. She also found at every family income level that those who believe that they can perform better on achievement tests compared to those that believe that they couldn't, and among the poorest kids, those who had a growth mindset were performing at a level of much wealthier kids. Now, when you look at fixed mindset and growth mindset, these are a couple of phrases to give you a concept of what represents each of these mindsets. If you have a fixed mindset, you might have a perspective that I'm either good at it or I'm not. It's, again, a lot like eye color. It's fixed. I can't do anything about it. I was born good or I wasn't. When I'm frustrated, I just give up. I don't like to be challenged. When I fail, I'm a failure. And so a growth mindset, in contrast, says, I can learn anything that I want to. And when I'm frustrated, I will persevere. It just might take a little bit more work. And I want to challenge myself. I'm willing to put myself in those situations that seem difficult because I'm not afraid to fail. Because when I fail, I learn. So in here is just a quick example of how you can change if you have, and in areas where you have a fixed mindset, to more of a growth mindset. If I'm not good at this, instead thinking, what am I missing? Just, there's just another piece that I have to acquire. And, when you think about, I give up, instead, I'm going to use some of the strategies that we learned. Or going down to the last one, plan A didn't work. And so you just stop. Instead, just think there's a plan B and a C and a D, and in that constant state of revision. So really changing your attitude from looking at mistakes being bad to instead being part of the learning process. So what does your story say about you? How do you internalize failure? How do you react when you come across challenging situations? Good point to reflect on. I also want to share, looking at the time here, I also want to share some research related to unlearning and a couple of other dimensions. The first is I want to share this research study that was done in looking at research that was randomized controlled trials across 3 journals: the Journal of Medical Association, the Lancet, and the New England Journal of Medicine. And these trials were reviewed between 2003 and 2017 in the Journal of Medical Association and the Lancet, and between 2011 and 2017 in the New England Journal of Medicine. And there were about 3,017 randomized controlled trials that were published. And after excluding studies that were novel and other subsequent screening, they found 396 medical reversals across 3 journals, which was about 13% of the randomized trials that were looked at. And what they found in this is that the most common areas where reversals occurred were places where medication was given, procedures occurred, vitamin or supplementation, or use of devices. So as you can see on this slide, they define a medical reversal as occurring when a new clinical trial, superior to predecessors by virtue of better controls, design, size, or endpoints, contradict current clinical practice. So in other words, you have situations where doctors and researchers and nurses are taught to do things a particular way, that research medicine looks at the best practices, and these are the best practices that they adapted. But then now there's new research that contradicts that research, which means that there needs to be a change in practice. And what they found is that there were 396 situations where routine medical practices were not in alignment with current science. And so here's an example that really gets to, again, not only the power of unlearning and the necessity, in this case, in terms of potential health outcomes, whether it's prescribing medication or it's also potentially looking at procedures that are conducted and the way that those procedures are conducted. So those are examples of really high stakes consequences for a profession that needs to constantly unlearn as new research is produced. I also want to show another perspective, which is Adam Galinsky had done a study to explore the effects of power on perspective and suggest that power reduces the ability to understand how people see, think, and feel. And so I want to share this. What they did is they wanted to test the ability for people to adopt visual perspectives of power. And so they primed these individuals with different levels of power, and then they asked them to write an E on their forehead. And what they found is that the high-powered individuals tended to write the E that was the way that they would see the E. And people with lower power tended to write the E in the ways that other people would see it. And so it's a really interesting study when you think about the idea of, how you are learning and unlearning, but also how that relates to seeking greater levels of leadership and as individuals acquire more power in society in different capacities. And then I want to skip over that one. I want to just go to this other study that they did. And they, again, primed people with power. And then they showed them 24 images of faces with various emotions expressed. And for each, they had to guess which of the emotions was being expressed. And what they found is that the people with higher power had more difficulty understanding the emotions that other people were expressing. And so the results of this study really showed that high power participants made more errors in judging the emotional expressions of others compared to the baseline participants who were unprimed. And so they realized that high power individuals are anchoring too heavily on their own perspectives and demonstrate a diminished ability to correct others' perceived perspectives. And so this is a good research to be thinking about for people who are either moving into or moving up into higher levels of leadership. I do also, in fairness, want to share some counter argument to the idea of unlearning. And so Dr. Boutin published an article in the Society of Biological Psychiatry that suggests that the main alternative to unlearning is the idea that extinction exists, which involves new learning that's stored along with the old. And that was one of the definitions that I shared with you. And so what they contend essentially is that if the original learning is not destroyed by some type of interference, and if the relapse is therefore always possible, then instead we need to know how to optimize that new learning. And he argues instead that we can't ever really unlearn, but rather it's more about that information, the new information sitting alongside of the old information and knowing when to activate that. So really quickly, just to start summarizing, a couple of takeaways that I think are really important as students is to challenge your own thinking by asking more questions and be really curious. Developing a growth mindset, being aware of your confirmation bias, and also surrounding yourself with people who think differently than you. Because I'll ask you this one question: did you come to college to stay the same or to grow? And I assume everyone would say that you came to grow. And in growing, it means being able to alter your perspectives on the world and expand your world beyond the world that you knew it before you came to college. So I just want to encourage you really quickly to write down one thought that resonated with you about your own ability to unlearn and when it might be applicable in your own life, and just be specific. I'm really big on reflection as a takeaway in the learning process. So just quickly write down one thought that resonated with you that really had applicability to your own life. Okay, and I want to also thank you for being here today and learning a new concept, or a concept maybe that you've been familiar with, but you had an opportunity to hear some other perspectives. Thank you so much for allowing me to join you today for your conference.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Christina. President Royal, you did amazing. I have a million questions, so of course, we're going to be focusing on a couple of questions that folks have asked. And, we have about 10 minutes. Thank you again. I mean, I think that one of the things that I took away from your presentation is the importance of really reflecting on that mindset that we have. And so how is it that we can unlearn the things that we sort of take for granted as the ways that things should operate, or the ways we should move forward, and in fact should challenge ourselves to think differently as well. So one question that came through that I thought was really great, there were several questions that were wonderful, and I have my own, but I'm going to ask the ones that came through first, is what do you believe we have been collectively asked to unlearn as a society in the past 3 years as a result of COVID and war and all these various different kind of legislative things that are coming down the pike that are really challenging, our societal context. So in a broader context, moving from the individual to the social, what do you see as what we've been asked to unlearn collectively?
I think that's a great question. I certainly think, and I have focused a lot at my own institution on equity, and I would say that we are faced with unlearning racism. Racism, sexism, heterosexism, linguicism, ableism. I think that is really coming on full display right now. And when you think about these as social constructs to begin with, we learn them and we can unlearn them as well. So I think that that's being challenged. I think even thinking about our financial structure, I think our values are being questioned as a society. Who do we feel we should look after everyone? Do we feel that we should still continue to give to the rich? And how much do we support for those that don't have much? I think that there's so many big societal shifts that are happening. I'd say the pandemic unearthed a lot of that. I'd also say George Floyd's murder really escalated this topic from the perspective of racism. And so there's so many elements that really come into play, but we are being challenged not only individually, but in the collective as well.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that the next question that was asked, I think it really speaks to this, is the next step, which is how do we encourage people to challenge themselves, to unlearn what they might feel is uncomfortable or very uncomfortable for some. So at the same time that we're also being challenged collectively, societally, and then of course all together and individually. What is that? How do we encourage those that might feel challenged? And I think that as educators, oftentimes we are in those spaces where we're challenging our students, fellow colleagues, faculty, staff, ourselves. But how do you do that? In bringing folks along when they may not feel as comfortable with that unlearning that needs to take place?
I think one of the pieces that is really helpful is when you talk to people who have been able to change their perspective and they didn't believe that they would be able to change their perspective. And let just take a student who comes out as LGBTQ and the parent is not receptive to that, but over time learns and then becomes one of the best champions, not only for their child, but for that topic in general. I think there's something about the stories of people who didn't believe that they could change their perspectives, but did. And for them to champion and for us to be allies in helping them to be able to share with more people how that occurred. And I also think we can't force people to change, but what we can do is we can create a receptivity to that. And I think that requires a lot of compassion and a lot of grace, because as we know, learning is not a linear path. And so therefore, as we go along this journey, we have to recognize that people and make space for people to make mistakes. And sometimes it's in the ability that they don't feel comfortable making mistakes, that they don't even want to try. And then they aren't going to be able to unlearn anything because they're going to be shut down. So I think it requires us to have this incredible compassion for people when they are at various stages of change, and then, but also still continue to sort of help them set the bar and new expectations on, whatever that topic might be.
So can I say that I know you're not going to be the president of HCC, but I want you to still stay in higher ed, because we need your voice and we need your, leadership still. So I hope you're still going to be engaged, because you're speaking exactly in the ways that we still need, absolutely, with leaders and students and faculty and staff, particularly with the compassion piece, because I think you're absolutely right. Like, we're still moving in these directions of challenging, but how do we do it in ways that are also cognizant that not everyone's in the same place, and sort of bringing folks along, while at the same time still moving forward for both learning, but also, of course, unlearning practices that are just not serving us well and not serving us as individuals or as a society.
When we were going through our strategic planning process back in 2017, when I arrived, we also worked on establishing a set of values for the institution. And one of the values we set was kindness. And that alone created a lot of controversy. But what does it mean to be kind? But how do we measure that? How do we define that? And but it's actually become the bedrock, I think, of everybody just recognizing that if we can show everyone a little bit more kindness, I think it's an absolute privilege when those of us who are educated, have this sort of higher consciousness about various topics. So how do we have compassion for those who are still on that learning journey and maybe not there yet, but are working towards it or being open to it or want to learn about it and have a curiosity? How do we fan those flames?
Well, and I love how in your presentation, you also shared about your own lived experience and how much of that also has inspired you to both move forward in your educational trajectory, but also the idea of challenging yourself for both, again, continuing to learn and unlearn and relearn the different ways of being in the world, and even imagining yourself as a president of a college, right? And not having that thought earlier on as a young person, but then here you are, an incredibly successful and wonderful educator and president of a very important community college in the area that I think serves so many students. And also in terms of the ways in which education as a whole can be imagined and you bringing that to the table. So again, so many questions, so many ways to engage. And I really do continue to hope that you will still be engaged in higher ed as you move into a different phase in your life, because again, we still need those voices and we need you to be present as well as much as possible, because this is how we're going to change the academy and higher education, for leaders like yourself that are guiding us in that process. So the last really quick question, because we are going to be wrapping up really soon, is a question about how to, as we get older. So this is the question: as we get older, it becomes harder to integrate new information and potentially maybe challenge ourselves in sort of learning new strategies. But what are some learning strategies that you can suggest for older students, perhaps struggling with memory retention, or also the sort of the sensitive stress curves that we might be engaging with? So how do we, because students are all learning in different ways as well, and not everyone is exactly in the same place. Any strategies that you may have for the way that we might use that that sort of framework to challenge ourselves and both unlearn and relearn?
Yeah, when I was pursuing my doctorate, I originally started with a PhD in adult learning, and I ended up switching to education. Mm-hmm. However, I really have an appreciation for the fact that adult learners do study differently. I do, though, challenge this notion that it's harder for us to learn. I think it just requires different strategies. For example, if you know that at 52, you are not as, you don't feel as poised to be able to study and memorize a lot of information, then you're probably not going to take a class where someone's lecturing. And you're probably going to flock more towards a class that is either more collaborative in style or, that there's more value in the group work. And therefore, there's the sharing and balancing of strengths with students of different ages. And so I think one of the important pieces for adult learners to know, and it was the piece I talked about with mindset, is that if you're telling yourself that you can't learn, then you aren't going to be able to learn. You have to be able to recognize that you have all of these tremendous assets. You have the value of lived experience that an 18-year-old doesn't have. So how do you reframe to look at your assets differently instead of saying that you can't do it? Because when you do that, then you bring a whole set of strengths to the classroom. And I find that traditional age students love that. They actually really benefit from having students, so everyone benefits from that. And so instead of coming in with the perspective that you're less than or you're less capable, then it's really about that mindset, believing that you have a growth mindset and that you have so much to offer in an educational experience.
Oh, I love it. I mean, that's exactly the ways in which we should be approaching, these contexts of educational contexts that we're in. So we're at time, and I'm so sorry that we have to cut our time for our next panels. But thank you so much, President Royal, for being here with us, for your amazing keynote. And I know it's going to be recorded, so if folks want to see it again, it'll be located on the MassURC website. And I also want to encourage those that are here listening in to continue asking questions, to continue engaging. We still have a full day of conference panels that are really amazing and wonderful of student researchers. So I want to encourage you all to participate and engage. And again, Christina, thank you again for being present and for sharing your wisdom with us. And we really wish you the best of luck as you move on to new and amazing, exciting opportunities moving forward as well. I know we're going to miss you here in this area, but you're going to be incredible and how you move forward in what you do. So thank you.
I'm staying here.
Yay.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join you for your conference, and best of luck for the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.